Welcome to Břevnov Monastery, the oldest monastery on the territory of the Czech Republic, and a place where 9 Benedictine monks are still actively living and working today. But beware, if you think they spend all day quietly sitting and praying, you're mistaken. Each of them has a civilian job. One works in a hospital, another binds books and restores old volumes, and one even runs his own company with over 50 employees. Fascinating, isn't it? Břevnov is a place where 1,000 years of spiritual tradition meet everyday life. And today, we'll take a closer look at more of what makes this living monastery so unique. Located, by the way, less than 3 kilometers from Prague Castle. Let's start right from the beginning. Who are the Benedictines? They are the oldest monastic order in Western Christianity, founded in the 6th century by Saint Benedict of Nursia in Monte Cassino, Italy. Together with his sister, Saint Scholastica, he laid the spiritual foundation not only for male, but also for female communities. Both branches still follow what is known as the Rule of Saint Benedict, which emphasizes prayer and work. Ora et labora, as the Latin phrase goes. One of those deeply inspired by this way of life was Saint Adalbert of Prague, the 2nd Bishop of Prague. During his time in Rome, he entered the Benedictine monastery of Saints Alexius and Boniface on the Aventine Hill. And it is their statues that we now see here in the Basilica of Saint Margaret. A silent reminder of the spiritual heritage that helped shape Adalbert's mission. In the year 993, Saint Adalbert, together with Duke Boleslaus II, decided to found the first male monastery in the Czech lands, right here in Břevnov. He brought with him 12 Benedictine monks from Rome, who helped him build the first wooden structures of the monastery, a simple, provisional complex. However, without the material support of Duke Bretislav I, this project would never have taken a permanent form. Thanks to his generosity, by the end of the 11th century, under Abbot Meinhard, the original wooden buildings were replaced with Romanesque stone structures. The Romanesque crypt beneath the presbytery of the Basilica of Saint Margaret is the oldest preserved part of the Břevnov Monastery. It was built in the mid-11th century, when the original wooden monastery was replaced by stone structures in the Romanesque style. The crypt played a fundamental role in the liturgy of its time. It allowed the faithful access to the remains of saints, the so-called relics. Among them was a bone of Saint Margaret of Antioch, the patron saint of the basilica. Thanks to these relics, the crypt became a pilgrimage site. Even today, the relic of Saint Margaret is part of the Baroque altar in the side chapel, symbolically connecting centuries of spiritual continuity. In the 13th century, a Gothic reconstruction of the monastery began, but in the following centuries, the monastery experienced difficult times. During the Hussite Wars, it was devastated, and spiritual life here nearly disappeared. Until the 18th century, only a handful of monks remained, maintaining the site and preserving its memory. In the cloister of the monastery, you'll find stunning wall paintings and portraits that commemorate significant Benedictine abbeys and figures connected to Břevnov. Among them is the monastery in Brumov, founded in the 13th century, which became a spiritual center of northeastern Bohemia. Then there is the monastery in Police nad Metuji, whose origins date back to the early 13th century, when a monk named Jurek of Rajhrad was sent there. And finally, the monastery in Rajhrad, the oldest Benedictine monastery in Moravia, traditionally founded in 1045. You will also find a portrait of Saint Anastasius, the first abbot of Břevnov, the man who stood at the cradle of the Benedictine tradition in this place, or a painting of Saint Vintíř, Gunther, a Bavarian nobleman, and Benedictine hermit who died in 1045 and remains the only saint buried here at Břevnov Monastery, and, of course, a painting of Saint Margaret, patron of the Basilica. These artworks are not just decorations. They serve as visual testimony to the expansion of the Benedictine order and its lasting influence on the spiritual and cultural life of the Czech lands. In the monastery halls, one also encounters a replica of a bell from the year 1313. This bell was originally cast for the Břevnov Monastery, but after its destruction by the Hussites in 1420, it was relocated to the Old Town Hall in Prague, where it served until 1945. During the Prague Uprising, it was destroyed in an air raid. Today, its replica stands as a reminder not only of the craftsmanship of medieval bell founders, but also of the resilience and continuity of the Benedictine legacy. Before entering the Teresian Hall, we pass through two antechambers where we find a portrait of Abbot Ottmar Daniel Zinke, the man who, in the 18th century, transformed Břevnov Monastery into the Baroque form we see today. The Teresian Hall itself is the largest space in the Břevnov prelature and, along with the church, the most artistically striking part of the monastery's Baroque structure. It was named Teresian in 1743, in honor of the coronation of Maria Theresa as Queen of Bohemia, and the accompanying confirmation of privileges granted to the Břevnov Monastery. The ceiling of the hall is adorned with a fresco by Bavarian painter Cosmas Damian Asam, titled The Miracle of the Hermit Vintíř at the Court of King Stephen of Hungary. The scene captures a remarkable moment from the life of Saint Gunther, who was invited to a royal banquet by King Stephen of Hungary and Queen Gisela. As a gesture of highest honor, he was served a roasted peacock. As a Benedictine monk, however, Vintíř strictly followed the rules of his order, which prohibited the consumption of meat, except in cases of serious illness. He thus found himself in a delicate situation, unwilling to break his vows, yet not wanting to offend the royal couple. So, he prayed fervently. And then, a miracle occurred. The peacock came back to life, spread its wings, and ascended to heaven on angelic wings. The ceiling of the Basilica of Saint Margaret is adorned with a masterful fresco cycle painted by the renowned Bavarian artist Cosmas Damian Asam. It was his very last work, and also considered one of the greatest artistic achievements of his life. The frescoes depict scenes from the lives of Saint Benedict, Saint Adalbert, Wojtek, and Saint Gunther, Vintíř. But did you know that Saint Vintíř is not only present in the painted scenes? His actual remains, his bones, are interred within the very walls of this basilica. This saint, who once lived in the forests and served as a bridge between faith and worldly power, has now rested here for over 1,000 years, in the peaceful silence he so deeply cherished. And finally, at the center of the liturgical altar stands a golden reliquary, containing a small fragment of the bone of Saint Adalbert, bishop, missionary, and founder of this monastery. More than a millennium later, his presence has symbolically returned to the very place where it all began.